Pinkert here at TradeGate Hub, and we have the pleasure of being joined by someone who had an influence over my life early in my career when I was a runner on the floor at the CME. Doug, really an honor to meet you. Your books created a paradigm that has, followed my career in the financial markets. Reading it early, how paradigms get formed, and let's take a look at some of them that I think that people should go back and read. And, we're talking about the international man. I think probably there's a lot of people thinking about maybe this isn't going to be the best place to be in the US, and definitely crisis investing had an impact on me. So welcome, Doug. Great to have you here.
Well, much appreciated. Much appreciated indeed.
Okay, so why don't we start here? You and I have one thing in common, and it's not that I'm on Wikipedia yet. Any guesses what we might have in common?
I understand that I have a Wikipedia biography, but
Yeah.
I haven't even looked at it for myself for many, many years, so I have no idea what they're saying about.
Yeah, it's nice. They give you a good description. And what we do have in common is that we're both born in Chicago.
That's interesting. I grew up on the southwest side in Beverly, around 102nd and Western mostly, but
okay.
I was born in Cicero.
Okay, I know it.
And which is where Al Capone came from. And I went to high school in Aurora. And I don't know if you know why Aurora is famous.
Why?
That's where Wayne's World was.
Oh, okay.
And then later on, we moved to northern Indiana, not far from the territory where the Blues Brothers were from, because they were from northern Indiana, not Chicago, actually.
Okay. So you followed Hollywood around in your moves.
Kind of if you would, a lower middle class version of Hollywood.
Okay. So I can relate to that. Born on the South Side, South Shore Country Club around there, and then migrated to Skokie, the northern suburbs of Chicago, where I grew up.
Are you still there now?
No, I'm here. I'm in California, left a long time ago. I was going to ask you before you left the region, because I know you're a globetrotter. Did you ever spend any time on the exchange floors, either the Board of Trade or the Merc?
No, I never did.
Okay.
Actually.
Okay. Because it was, I just took a shot thinking that what you got involved in your writings. Why don't we talk a little bit about that? How did your philosophies and the way you started to see financial markets in the 70s, what influenced you and what motivated you to become an author of these types of books to reach out to the world and share your insights, which are normally contrarian to what most people read?
Yes, perhaps it goes back to this old argument of whether we are what we are mostly because of nature or because of nurture. I fall generally on the nature end. I've always been the person that I am, thinking kind of the way that I think. But as far as my intellectual progress goes, I think the first important book that I read that actually started influencing my thinking was in high school, probably a sophomore in high school. I read a compendium of H.L. Menken's work. I immediately became, and still am, a huge fan of H.L. Menken. He was a genius. That was first. Second thing was, in 1964, you might recall Barry Goldwater was running for president as a Republican, and he was very problematical in many ways, but still his conscience of a conservative at that stage in my life introduced me to concepts I hadn't thought of. Then, after I got out of college, I made a real breakthrough, and that was I read Ayn Rand's Virtue of Selfishness. One of her lesser known books, it's small essays, it's only about 110 pages, but it's a work of genius. It was so great that I had to put it down after I read the first page because I was thunderstruck by it.
That's one I haven't read, but Alan Greenspan was very heavily influenced by being part of the inner circle.
Yeah, well, he didn't stay influenced, unfortunately. He traded his soul to become a big shot and a master of the universe and so forth. I met Greenspan briefly once, and have no particular opinion on him other than knowing what he did after he became rich and famous. And that's why he became rich and famous. So he's kind of an ex-Randite.
Okay.
But I'm a firm believer in her general sense of life, Rand's view of life. And not many people are today, I think.
Yeah, I think that everyone has an I disease. I want this, I did this, I got this many views, I'm liked by 1,000 people. All about the I in this world now.
Yeah, well, it's all about Sauron's I, which is watching the whole world and will turn you in if you're naughty at this point. So that's the really big I that I worry about.
Okay, so let's talk about the big I really getting a telescope. And I think the story of CBDCs, Doug, that's really being undercovered, especially in mainstream financial news. Maybe you can read about it on the fringe. But I believe this is the biggest financial story since Bretton Woods, or maybe ever.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, well, I was talking to a guy who's fairly savvy, and I said, well, aren't you worried about the surveillance aspects of the CBDC? He says, well, they already know everything. They already have control over everything. So here's an educated guy that's already accepting what it is without considering what the ramifications are. So you say this is probably the biggest move for total control over humanity in world history, because they've never had tools like this before to dominate people. Why don't you tell us what you think is your view on it? And we're already in a beta test, aren't we? The Fed and banks are already testing it out. When do you think they're going to attempt to roll it out? Will it take a dollar crisis for them to do it? And do you think they allowed this crypto thing to go on so that people would become acclimated and think it's a good thing to get a digital currency?
Well, the rollout of central bank digital currencies is going to be a catastrophic disaster. But we've had one after another of them in recent years. I mean, look, to start with, I don't believe that central banks should exist because money and interest rates are the most important single elements of a capitalist society. I don't even want to say capitalist because that word has become so corrupted. I would say a free market society, one where you can maximize your personal wealth and your personal freedom. Look, it started with the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, a very bad idea. And since then, it's grown like Topsy. It's become extremely powerful, where it controls almost everything. And the next step, I mean, they tried to prop up a collapsing economy, which we're looking at, actually. It's going to be the worst thing that's happened economically since the, well, I can go back further.
Civil
but it's going
War?
to be, put it this way, it's going to be much worse than the last Great Depression. It's going to last longer. It's going to be much deeper, and it's also going to be much different than the unpleasantness of 1929 to 1946. And these idiots have tried quantitative easing, which is printing up money by the truckload, by the trillions of currency units. And they've tried ZIRP, zero interest rate policy, which in some ways is even more stupid. Now they're experimenting with modern monetary theory, which is even more idiotic than Keynesianism was. But it's a moral thing, not an economic thing. The question is who controls your life, you or some moron in Washington or Basel?
Right.
It's a moral issue. It's a question of what's right and what's wrong. It's not a question of, pulling levers to make the economy do better or worse.
Can I interject something on the Fed? Because, there is sentiment growing for this, Doug, anti-Fed. And I once asked Trader Vic while they began this tightening regime, do you think the Fed is making a policy error? And he said to me, Dale, the Fed always makes policy errors. So if and the public, at least the people in the financial community, know what generated this inflation. They know it was the punch bowl for 20 years. And now we have to trust the people who started the fire to put it out. And if they stay tight too long, their credibility is waning dramatically. They were caught doing insider trading in, many of the Fed governors just resigned. Modern day justice, no, I'd be in jail. So do you think the Fed is eventually going to go away because we're in the end game for them?
Yes, I'd like to believe that. They never should have been created. They should be abolished. And the world should go back to commodity money, probably gold. And as a matter of fact, as we speak, countries like Russia and China and India,
big time buyers.
Yes, they're big time buyers of gold. And why is that? Because they really can't trade in US dollars anymore. Well, the Russians have found that the US dollars they had were stolen, confiscated from them. And the Chinese realized, that could happen to us. And it could happen to anybody that's out of favor with Washington. So nobody wants to use dollars anymore. Dollars are convenient because that's what the world uses, but we're going away from that. But people don't want to use the yuan because why should we trust the Chinese government anymore when we trust in the US government or the ruble? I mean, who wants to believe in that and trust in that? So how are they going to trade with each other if they don't use dollars, which all cleared through New York, which is idiotic for countries that have the US as an adversary. So what they're going to do is go back to gold because it's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. So, all this nonsense that is spewed out of Washington, D.C. and the Eccles building, which is where the Fed lives, I think they're going to dry up and blow away. And we're going to go back to gold as money. Yes.
Very. So we have people waking up and buying gold. We've had a real nice run since October. I'm a trader. I'm short-term short, but I believe any break to 1800 or so, you need to back up the truck because we will see new highs in gold. I think 24,500 is conservative. But I'd like to get to, again, when you think they're going to roll out the CBDCs, because I think that's when there's really going to be a rush into gold. And also want to bring up and get your view on Bitcoin. Because what I like about Bitcoin, Doug, and I know there's no price discovery, I know it's not gold, but the portability factor of it. I talked to a guy and he said you could memorize 12 words and have access to your capital anywhere you go in the world. What's your view on Bitcoin? I know your view on gold.
Well, I was a late adopter to Bitcoin.
Oh,
I was introduced to it back in 2013 when a friend of mine from Belgium, I was in Argentina at the time, and he gave me a physical Bitcoin. They actually exist. Uh,
are they
was what-
gold? They're
Pardon?
gold, aren't they? Their
Well, they
color
look
is
like
gold.
they kind of look like gold. I still have it in my safe deposit box.
Okay.
Um, but um, but look, at the time, he was promoting it to me as a new form of money, and I listened to him. And I'd go back to Aristotle's definition of what of the things that constitute a good money. And Aristotle came up with, this is the 4th century BC, with 5 characteristics of a good money. It has to be durable. That's why we don't use wheat as money. It has to be divisible. That's why we don't use artwork as money. You can't make change for the Mona Lisa by dividing it up. It has to be convenient. That's why we don't use lead as money. It has to be consistent. That's why we don't use real estate as money, because every piece is different from every other piece. And the last thing that Aristotle brought up was it has to have use value in itself so that you're not going to get stuck holding the bag with it. And I couldn't see the use value of Bitcoin. It seemed like a trading sardine. You're familiar with trading sardines as opposed to eating sardines, because I trade commodities just like you do every day, actually.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure that out until I realized exactly the point that you brought up, which is that it obviates having to use the SWIFT system or use banks or get involved with the government anyway. It's very, very convenient. There's a 6th thing that Aristotle didn't bring up, incidentally, because it didn't make sense to him. It wouldn't have. It's that it can't be created out of nothing, which is the case for all the currencies in the world today. So the answer to your question is I'm a big believer in Bitcoin. And I think right now, as we speak, what is it, 16.5 or something like that?
We've had a little bit of a rally. It's trading up towards 17.5.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, here I'll
Well,
bring it up.
I think
There
it's
you go.
I think it's at the bottom, although there's still a bubble in the cryptocurrencies. I mean, the fact that the Dogecoin or doggy
Yeah.
coin is what I'd call it, it still has a market cap of I think $12 billion. And it was started as a joke. It's totally worthless, but add them up and it's worth $12 billion. So, and there's lots of crap. There's 20,000 of these, shit coins out there. And almost all of them are going to go away. Bitcoin is different. It's different, structurally different. So yeah, I'm a fan of Bitcoin.
All right, I think we'll get one more break to new lows, take out this 16,000. I'm interested between 15 and 14,000. Maybe a little risk off in equities will take it down, or a dollar pop. So, but it's going to be my first buy. I'm waiting to buy it, and that's not to trade it, but I'm actually going to need help, Doug, because to me, a wallet is made of leather. And the wallets that you use for Bitcoin, they're not made of leather, are they?
No, I understand what you're talking about. And as useful as my computer is, I've learned to hate it and not to trust it
Yeah.
also. So
Yeah.
I understand. But gold is the real numeraire. Gold is basically money. But Bitcoin has a real place in today's world. So I'm a fan.
Okay. And so we covered gold, and gold looks great, and we've covered Bitcoin. And I saw a past interview with you, Doug, and I thought it was a great story. You talk about your first big hit in the market, your first big score, and it was in South African gold miners, right?
That's right.
And you took every cent you could put together and piled into that trade. So you had so much conviction about that.
Yeah.
How did it feel when they came home for you? It was like freedom?
Well, yeah. Well, that's how I bought at the bottom one time. I bought it dead at the bottom. And tell you what happened. I was a broker at the time, and got this new guy that heard that I specialized in mining stocks. And he called me up, opened an account, bought some stocks. What stocks did he buy? Well, he said he wanted to be a risk taker. So I put him into names that no longer exist: Rootfly, Leslie, Stillfontaine. People that are dinosaurs will remember these names, but none of these companies exist anymore.
I have one foot in the tar pit.
Yeah. And each back in those days, those companies had current dividend yields. In this was like June of 1976, and they had current dividend yields of about 50 to 70%. That's an unbelievable number. And that was after gold had gone from a peak of 200 down to 100.
Oh, I was on the floor when that happened, Doug, when they made it
Oh.
legal again for U.S. citizens to own gold. It hit the market at 200 and they cut it in half. I remember that.
Yeah. Well, what happened that particular day was gold hit a bottom of $103, number one. And simultaneously, coincidentally, there were major riots in Soweto in South Africa. And these gold stocks fell out of bed. And Elmer, I remember his name, bought a lot of stocks. And I was always eating my own cooking. But he calls me up and says, I want to cancel the order. And I said, Elmer, this isn't Kresge's. You can't take the merchandise back.
Yeah.
And he hung up the phone on me. So at that point, as a broker, I
You
either
owned
have
it.
to sell it back into the market and pay the costs,
Yeah.
or transfer them into my own account. And I figured if anybody as stupid as Elmer wants to sell, and there's all this bad news, and that's how I bought the stuff at the exact bottom. And by the time I sold them years later, I was getting considerably more in annual dividends, and they were already paying 50 to 70% than I paid for the stocks. So yeah, that was a big hit for me.
That's happening now a little bit. Like BTG pays a 4% yield. There are miners beginning to pay yields, which is unheard of in my career in the last 40 years. But I want to get to silver.
Well, for North American miners, it's not just, it's the big one. Even Newmont, the biggest gold miner in the world, is paying 5%. Barrick, about that. These are high yields in today's interest rate environment, and for non-South African gold stocks also. Yes, quite correct.
They pay you to wait when you're collecting a dividend. But, I want to move to silver because you described the gold market as if you released all the water in Hoover Dam, it would be like going through a garden hose because of the relatively smaller market cap of gold miners. You said uranium would be a soda straw. What kind of straw would silver be?
Well, silver really is a teeny weeny market. I mean, rough numbers. They mine about 80 million ounces of gold per year. They mine about 800 or 900 million ounces of silver, about 10 times more. But in terms of value, it's much, much less because silver is $23 or $24, and gold is $1,800 or whatever like that. So, and for many years, people said, well, silver should be, quote unquote, 1/18 of the value per ounce of what gold is. It's not that way anymore. It's more.
Well, you're talking gold-silver ratio currently.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
and of course, there are no fixed ratios in the commodity world. I mean, it doesn't work that way. So the answer to the question is yes. When the public gets the bit in its teeth and fear rules the market, and people want to get out of dollars and get into something real, something tangible, I don't see why silver isn't going to go to $50, $100 an ounce, $200 an ounce. It's entirely possible. And at that point, I suspect unless the dollar loses all value, which will happen at some point. At that point, I hope that I sell all my gold and silver, physical gold and silver, substantial amount. I guess the real tip-off for me is going to be, when is the public really being? I've always watched the covers of magazines.
Yeah.
They're like a gauge of stupidity and contrary opinion.
Yes.
And I figured that when the real mania hits gold and silver, Slime or Newspeak magazines, should they still exist at that point, are going to have a picture of a golden bear tearing apart the New York Stock Exchange. And
I like that.
Yeah, I think it's a good, that's an original image that I came up with. I hope to sell them all and buy something like Berkshire Hathaway and make my life simpler.
I'm off. Simple as power.
Yeah. Look, I've got other things to do in life, as do you, other than just, play with money and try to gain more of it. Of course, we all want more money for all kinds of reasons, moral, philosophical reasons, in addition to practical reasons. But there's other things in life.
Definitely. I always say this, Doug, that trading is what I do. It's not who I am.
Exactly. That's a good point.
Okay, so let's get back to and start to think about wrapping it up. I want to leave this interview with some hope. And we all know we're going to have to ride out a storm, but you actually have ideas for when the dust settles or we're in the midst of what you called the Greater Depression. Your ideas on how we could rebuild and restart and through the ashes rise like a phoenix and have something more ideal for people than what we have now. You want to talk about that?
Well, it gets pretty radical. I'm of the opinion that most of the countries in the world are going to break up into smaller countries. What we saw happen to the Soviet Union 30 years ago, what we saw happen to Yugoslavia, which broke up into 6 different countries. We saw Czechoslovakia break into 2 countries. Okay, this is going to keep happening. Russia itself is going to break up into a number of countries because it's really a domestic empire. It's not all just Russians speaking Russian. It's nothing like that in Russia. I've traveled to 155 countries. I've lived in 12, speaking to you right now from Uruguay, as a matter of fact. So the colors of the map on the wall are running, and it's going to change radically. I don't doubt that in 50 years, the US itself is going to have secession movements.
Texas talks about it all the time.
Yes, sure, exactly. Well, it's not only Texas, because the government in Washington at this point is run by genuine, active Jacobins. They're the same people that took over France in 1789. Same views, same philosophy, same everything. Maybe even crazier. So that, no, the US is going to break up. Canada is going to break up too. No doubt about that. The US has become a domestic empire, actually. Not at all what it started. Look, this is going to happen to lots of countries. Brazil is going to break up. Bolivia is going to break up into at least 2 countries. We can talk about all these places. None of the countries in Africa will stay the same. I mean, they're all artificially cobbled together, make no sense whatsoever. They all hate each other and want to take over the government to use it as a means to enrich themselves and gain power. Well, pretty much like is happening here in the US. So that's a big one that's going to happen, which is why you want to be diversified internationally. You shouldn't have all your eggs in one geographical or political basket, because as dangerous as the financial world is today, the political world is even more dangerous. for your personal well-being. And I can give you lots and lots of recent examples of people that weren't diversified politically were screwed, starting out with the Germans, and well, we can go before then, the Germans in 1933, the Chinese in 1946, the Vietnamese in 1973, the Cubans in 1959. I mean, you have to diversify internationally.
Okay. Where do you think the best place to ride out the storm would be? I have a few places in mind if people have the flexibility to be expats.
Well, as you pointed out, you're familiar with, actually, it was my first book. It was called The International Man, a guidebook to making the most of your personal freedom and financial opportunity around the world.
I recommend everyone read it now.
Yeah, it always changes.
Yeah.
But like right now, I'm in Uruguay, which is certainly the most stable country in Latin America. Latin America is not a stable place, but Uruguay is pretty good.
What about El Salvador? A lot of Bitcoin maximalists like Max Kaiser are relocating to El Salvador. What do you say about El Salvador?
Well, I've been to 155 countries, including El Salvador. And before this thing with Bukele running the country, I would have picked El Salvador as the least likely place and the least desirable place in all of Latin America, which is saying something.
It is.
I mean,
you're bearish.
Horrible place, overpopulated. No. And if Bukele goes away, I think he's a good guy, nice what he's doing with Bitcoin and trying other reforms. El Salvador is going to turn back into a shithole. So
Okay.
I wouldn't make a long-term bet on El Salvador, although I wish them well. And I hope they turn into the new Singapore, better yet, the new Hong Kong. But I used to live in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong today is a very different place than it was a generation ago. So,
well, you also talk, and we'll wrap it with this, Doug. You make comparisons of the U.S. to the Roman Empire, and what I want to know with what's happening politically here, and was it Shakespeare who said, "When the coffers are full, the people cry out for democracy, and when they're empty, they cry out for a strong man"?
Yeah, that's what we're going to get in the U.S.
Okay, and that's what I was going to ask you. So compared to Rome, are we about to enter the season of Caesar, where we have a Caesar here?
No, we're way past Caesar.
Okay,
we're more like entering the 4th century, which is, look, in my podcast, I don't know if you mentioned that or not, but I have a weekly podcast on YouTube. It's pretty good.
I'm going to have to catch it. I didn't know that.
You'll like it. Right. And I also do a weekly article at internationalman.com, which I think everybody, since it's free, everybody ought to go there and read the articles. But I recently put together an article of the 10 major trends that are destroying Western civilization. Forget about the US. Well, don't, because that's the major bastion of Western civilization. But the 10 trends that are destroying Western civilization itself, they're really, really serious and really, 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 really bad news. And people just don't think about them. So yeah, I'm a bear, but here where I am in Uruguay, which is the most stable country in Latin America at the moment, and I think it will be for some time to come. It's very, very pleasant. If I was going to be in the Orient, I would choose Thailand. Spent a lot of time there, great place. But where are you going to go? It's like Joe Louis said, you can run, but you can't hide. And the world is going into a really unpleasant, nasty time for the next 10 years.
Okay, Doug. It's really been eye-opening talking to you. I feel like a kindred spirit to you, and really think that I warned people that this would not be for Pollyanna to watch his interview. And I respect that you walk your talk. You write a book about an international man, you become an international man, or already was. So you talk about these things in the market, and it's not just advice. You have skin in the game. So again, Doug, I'm a fan, and I'm glad that you're putting out some things I wasn't aware of. You have a new follower in Dale Pinkert.
Well, I appreciate that. And well, maybe we can do this again and sometime in the future, Dale, and we'll see whether I have egg on my face or whether the current trend is continued and accelerated, which is the way I'm betting.
Yeah, they say the tincture of time. Time will tell.
That's right.
Thank you, Doug Casey. I had a great time.
Much appreciated.
Enjoyed. Adios, everybody. You can watch this on video on YouTube and start reading Doug's stuff and watching his videos. We're in the zone where you have to be aware and not keep your head in the sand because you don't want to think about it.